Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
My guest for this episode is Case Lane, a global writer, podcaster, entrepreneur, traveler, and founder of Ready Entrepreneur. A former diplomat, consultant, and corporate executive, she now prepares aspiring entrepreneurs to understand how to take advantage of technology and global resources to achieve lifestyle freedom by starting their own online businesses. After a successful book promotion podcast tour, Case developed an approach to help professionals, writers, entrepreneurs, and other public speakers understand and navigate the growing podcast industry as guest speakers. Hi, Case. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
We're going to be talking about guest podcasting, which isn't a term I heard, at least not in the way you use it as a campaign. And before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit more about you, the Ready Entrepreneur, and the books you've written?
Sure. I'll do a quick version. Like so many people, I had a corporate career before going into online entrepreneurship, so I won't get into all the details of that. But my first work in online entrepreneurship was as a writer. I've always wanted to be a writer, and so I started self-publishing, and I thought it was amazing that Amazon and Smashwords and all these platforms allowed writers to go directly to readers. And I realized the same thing was happening with all of online business, and I started to get into all of the different parts of online business, and landing pages, websites, reader magnets, all these things I've heard of before. And people started asking me what I was doing. And I realized that a lot of people thought it was cool to do something online. They could see that people were doing things. They weren't sure exactly how it was all working, and there was no kind of overall picture. So I started Ready Entrepreneur, and Ready Entrepreneur starts right at the beginning of the process. If you're an aspiring entrepreneur or you're somebody who has business ideas in your head, you just have no idea how to move forward with it, that's where I come in right there at the beginning and help you understand the online business landscape and how you can benefit from it and take advantage of it. So that's how I started. And then I went from there into guest podcasting through the promotion process and understanding how to reach out to audiences and deliver value to more people. And podcasting has grown so much and become such a new and important platform for people that I sort of took a deeper dive into it to help other people understand how they could use it as well.
I think when we get into these things for the benefit of time and efficiency and most of all effectiveness, we need people like you, the guide, the mentor and the like, to bring us along. So that's great. That's great. And I'm glad you're here to talk to us about guest podcasting and how you can help people as they want to be guests and the like, and develop a campaign. If you would, explain what guest podcasting is.
Sure. Yeah, and it's funny you say that about the term, because I wasn't sure what term people were using. So I had reached out to looking, I had searched and so on. So guest podcasting, or podcast guesting, or some people call it, or pod guesting, as I've started to see. That is being a guest speaker, a speaker on a podcast. So podcasts now have grown incredibly. There's now last number I saw, more than 1.7 million podcasts that are out there on the different platforms. Many of them do interviews. Many of them want to talk to people about their ideas and their products, their message, and so on. So it's a great opportunity for public speakers to go on podcasts and to speak to audience. Now, you can't see the audience, but it's out there. More and more people, millions of people listening to podcasts, listening in so many different categories and genres. So guest podcasting is going out there and reaching out to podcasters to be a guest speaker on their show. All
right. So once they do that, what's the benefit? Why would I take the time to research and all the things you're going to talk about in a little while? Why would I take the time to do those? What am I going to get out of that effort?
Yeah, so the idea is that you want to get your message out there. Now, depending, you could be an entrepreneur, a professional. You could be, you have many different reasons why you want to be speaking to an audience. And podcasters all have an audience. They said, some have audiences of dozens, and some have audiences of tens of millions. So think about it as an opportunity to speak to that crowd. You could be the same as if you got an invitation to speak to a room of 1,000 people, and they're all going to be listening. These are people that actively go to a podcast, weekly, daily, whatever, and they download them, they listen to them, and they make a point of listening. They put on a podcast at a point during their day when they can actually listen, when they're in the car or they're doing cleaning or they're out doing the yard or something like that. So, and some of them actually listen as a form of training. There's a lot of podcasts that are informational, educational. So people will put on a podcast as if it's an online course or something like that they're taking. So if you have a message that you want to deliver to an audience, maybe you're promoting a product or a service, maybe you've come up with a new idea that you want to get out to more people, maybe you want to strengthen your authority and your influence, and you can speak on these virtual podcast stages, and you're actually speaking to this very attentive audience. So that's why it's something that, as you're thinking about promoting and getting your ideas out there and delivering value to audiences, you should definitely be considering podcasting.
It's funny when you were describing that, I'm thinking, I do that. I do that.
Excellent.
On Mondays and Tuesday mornings, there are podcasts that I listen to religiously.
Yes.
And they're the first thing I do. I actually have speakers in the shower. So,
oh, wow. Good for you. Put the speakers in. Right. I have the podcast playing, but I don't have speakers for it. That's why I think about that.
Yeah. And I listen to these two particular podcasts in those mornings. Mm-hmm. But then when I'm in the car, I either continue them or listen to others. Yes. And some are for the entertainment value, but most of them are for the educational value.
Yeah. Although I'm glad you mentioned entertainment, because you could also be somebody who just wants to tell some good jokes, or you've got some, or do a dramatization, and there are podcasts for that too. So
I think there's a podcast for just about anything you could possibly think of.
I think so too. Yeah, that's why it's such a great opportunity. It's whatever you could possibly think of.
All right. So for those of our listeners who say, this is a great idea and I'm really interested in it, mm-hmm. What's the approach you suggest? What approach did you develop?
Yeah, so I decided, let me go back a little bit. I was taking a course for a self-publishing course, and knew I'm one of these people who take lots of courses. This one was more focused on marketing and promotion, and they were talking about podcasts, and they didn't really explain how to do it. So I just literally started from scratch. I thought, all right, let's see what's out there, do the Google search, see what's going on. And I delved into it. So I created this approach based on what I learned when I was researching podcasts for this book tour that I wanted to do. So the first thing to think about, I'm just going to talk about the actual mechanics of it. There's other things to do when you're preparing for guest podcasting that we can talk about. But the mechanics are, you have to think about, what is your message? Because what you're going to do is search for podcasts that fit the message or the product or the thing that you want to talk about. So what that means is you have to have a very clear idea in your mind about what you want to talk about. It is talking, after all. Podcast is an audio medium, so you want to be able to communicate and think about your message so that when you go into searching for podcasts, you're actually searching by categories and keywords. This is one of the big things I tell people to think about. What are the categories and the keywords that describe what you want to talk about? Now, one of the challenges is that the podcast directory, so podcasts are hosted on platforms you've heard of. Most people have heard of things like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher. Even if you haven't heard of them, there's dozens and dozens of different applications that you can have on your phone or on your desktop that will play podcasts for you. And there are also directories that are just purely directories where you can go in and search for podcasts. So if you're a potential guest, the thing you're going to be doing is searching for podcasts that suit your subject matter. Now, when you do that, you have these very broad categories. So if you're used to looking for really specific topics, you're not going to see that on the podcast directories. They'll have business, will be one whole thing, and everything related to business, from entrepreneurship to major corporations, will all be under one thing. Health will all be under one thing. So you really have to think clearly about what words you want to search for. And the search engines are not robust like Google search. You're going to put in a one word like public speaking. You'll put in public speaking, and you'll get every podcast that has the word public speaking in it. So that's how it works. Right. So the initial search is all around just you have to think for yourself. What would be the categories or keywords people are looking for? Then you're going to go into these podcast directories to find them. So you just pull out, and I just say, again, there's more than 1 million and something of them. So just pull out all the names that you see that look like they might fit what you're talking about. And then you go from there and start researching them one by one. So I'm talking about a very do-it-yourself process. I'm not talking about, just paying somebody to do it. Or you could have, you can pay somebody to do this process for you. But this is not like going through a PR agency or something like that. This is actually, you're going to have to do it yourself, going through and researching each podcast to find ones that look like they're right for you. And there's a couple of things to look for. The first thing is, what's the last post date of the last episode? So when you go into a podcast directory, you find see the podcast name, it looks good, you click on it, you're looking at the directory page, look first, what's the date of the last posted show? Because podcasts live forever. It's not like, traditional media where there are seasons or people announce when they're ending or anything like that. Podcasters can do what they want. It's still kind of wide open. So you might be looking at a show that looks really good and then find out that there hasn't been an episode posted for a year. So you might want to guess that podcaster is probably not doing it anymore.
Yeah, so no sense spending your time pursuing that
Exactly. So look for that date. That looks good. Then look at the description. A lot of podcasters put in the description whether or not they do interviews, but not always. But it gives you a good idea. Then you look at the episodes. And you'll see, depending which directory, but the ones that you want to be looking at actually give you an episode description. So you'll again be able to see if they actually have interviews or not. Now, you might see a podcaster puts that they do interviews in the description, but then there's no interviews that have actually been posted. And that could be just because they couldn't find anyone they wanted to interview. So that's also a great opportunity, because you can put that in your pitch letter and say, I see you were planning to have interviews. So you go through that. And then if all that looks good, when you do the search in the podcast directory, you take your search to the next level, which is into just general web searching and social media searching on the podcast host and the podcast show, because you want to find contact information and you want to see if there's any connection that you make so that you can actually and listen to the show, because you want to write a pitch email. Most people send emails. You want to write a pitch email to that podcast host that really shows that you can deliver value to their show because you did your homework, you looked into it, you did your research, and you can write a really good tailored email based on what you saw. So it's one by one. It's not, again, not an easy process, but it's a valuable process because you're really going after shows that look like good match for you. You're delving into the background of the host and the show, which even if they say no, it gives you information about people that are active in your industry or your subject matter that you probably want to look at again. And you can build a direct connection with the host because you're actually doing this work yourself. If you pay a PR agency to do it for you, you don't know what you're getting. But if you actually do it yourself, you know exactly what you're getting, which is all of this information which you can use later to network and collaborate and to continue to build your presence in your particular subject area.
Excellent. Now, 3 points here. One is where you say that they're right for you. You've got to be right for them as well. Yes. And the second point is the people you can hire. And we talked about this in a prior phone call that we had about a lot of podcasts get approached. Now, I've been approached this way of, my client would be an awesome interview for you. Well, great. What do they bring to public speaking or presentation skills? What knowledge? Well, they're an engineer and they really don't speak, but it's like, all right, so you have no clue what my podcast is about.
Right.
And the third point is you practice what you preach. And I just want to let the listeners know, when I got an email from you, or it might have been through LinkedIn, actually, you contacted me and you spelled it out here's what I do. Here's why I think it benefits your show and your listeners. And you were dead on. And I was prepped for, here's what I do. And my response being, okay, that's not what I talk about. And you just absolutely nailed it. And I couldn't wait to call you and get in touch with you and get to know you and then have you on here because you do practice what you preach. And I was absolutely impressed.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I really do. I really enjoy this process. I do want to provide value to listeners, and so I want to make sure I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to waste my time. I want to make sure it's a good experience for everybody and for the listeners. So I'm glad that works. That's what I've been trying to perfect as I go through this.
Let me ask you this. Once someone secures a spot, so they contact the podcast host and the podcast host says, yep, we're going to have you on. What do they need to do to prepare for that guest interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I'm going to take a step back. This is a part you do need to do it to prepare for the interview, but I would say even do it before you start researching. Just a few things to have in your back pocket before you start researching so that you're ready for the kinds of things that podcast hosts ask for. So these are kind of, technical things. Have a bio ready. So 2-3 lines, maybe even a longer one that you can edit, because a lot of hosts ask for that. And you're thinking about, this is a promotional opportunity, so make sure that the information is what you want to be distributing to the world at this time. You should have a headshot. It's a good professional headshot, or just a really good picture, again, that you're going to use. Think about this more broadly. It's a much bigger process than just, I'm going to go do an interview for an hour. It's, this is going to be promoted. It's going to be on social media. You don't even know where else it's going to be. So you want to have that good picture in the back of your pocket. And then just have things like if you have a logo, your social media handles, if you're going to have an offer to the listeners, you want to have that link ready. You just want to have all of that ready. And then, your website as well. Like if you've got a website and, if you're talking about something and you want to make sure that the information is there, because don't miss the opportunity. You realize you're reaching out to a new audience that maybe hasn't heard of you before. And as you're talking about everything that you do, you want, anybody who follows up, you want them to really grasp that you are who you say you are and all of that so that they can get that information. So just if your website's not up to date, just make sure you do an update and that kind of thing. And you can do this continuously, but it's just a good way to be prepared. And then I know a lot of people are concerned about the technical equipment. This is probably right now. Podcasts are growing very, very quickly, but they're still outnumbered about 500 to 1 by blogs. So I think a lot of people think, it's just a lot easier to start writing with a blog. I would say the only, not the only, but the top thing to concern yourself about, of course, is how you sound. This is a recorded interview. You want to make sure you sound good. And for most hosts, then prefer that you have a separate microphone. But those are, they're not expensive. If you're really going to get into guest podcasting, it's worth it to make that investment in a good external microphone that then you can have for all of your interviews going forward. And same with if you're going to be on camera. I know that's a surprise. It's a podcast. Why am I on camera? You might be asking. But a lot of podcasters are recording the interview in Zoom and putting it up on YouTube. A lot of podcasts people listen to on YouTube. So you want to have all of that ready ahead of time. And then you're really good as you're going in when the host says yes, and they say, could you send me your bio and your headshot and everything? You've got it all. It's all ready to go. So work on just having that set of things ready before you even start. Then as you get into it, and then of course you're making sure your pitch and everything is good, but then you can feel really comfortable about reaching out to any host when you've got that initial set of things organized. I haven't seen too many other requests beyond those types of things, like for your bio and your headshot.
No, it's all pretty straightforward. When you look at other podcasts that have been posted, you can see what they've requested just by looking at it. Like you said, the headshot and all. The one of the things you were just talking about that really struck home with me is the microphone. Yeah. You just can't sound like you're with a tin can and string.
That's a good idea.
And the microphone on most computers, 1 out of 10, are probably a 3 at best. And we rely on those, and they just sound horrible. And you're right. You know, from $50 to $100, and you certainly can go up much more expensive with microphones, but you can get a USB microphone, plug it into your computer, you're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And that's the thing. Don't worry about it. Don't think it's like you have to have some really high level studio, with all sorts of special things. You want to be in a quiet place. Obviously when you're recording, you want to sound good. And the thing is, so many people are doing podcasts right now. And of course, everybody has to be isolated, you're doing it with social distancing. So even the big shows are doing everything over, recording it through whatever app or something like that. So you're not competing in a sense with the big traditional studios with all the fancy equipment and all of that, because a lot of people aren't doing that right now. So just as long as you sound good and you sound clear and you just want to make sure that the host has a good experience and you, of course, the listeners, because that's one thing for listeners. People want to hear the information. It's really important with podcasts are a different way of consuming information. The talking is directly in your ears, and it's like you're sitting in on a conversation that you weren't invited to originally, or you just walked in and they didn't kick you out type of thing. And so that's a much different experience. So people want that information. They're really into it. But at the same time that, you want to make sure that obviously they could hear it clearly. And if they can't, they'll switch to something else. So, just make sure you do your part on that side.
That's a good point. With all those things that they should do, is there anything they should avoid other than speaking into their laptop microphone? Anything else they should avoid or just not do that'll help both them and the podcast host?
Yeah, you alluded to just making sure that your pitch is on point, which means you don't want to disappoint the listeners and the host when you're actually on air, as I'll say. You write a good pitch and they have you on. Don't forget that the audience is there, even though you can't see them. You're still delivering value for that audience. That's still what's important. So you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. And I would even suggest practice. You can't think about every possible question people could ask, but you can think of some of them. And you want to make sure that you're ready for them and that you feel very strongly about your message. You've got it down pat. You've got your thoughts organized in your mind, that type of thing. So you could practice a bit and just in your mind, what would it be like to have the conversation going? Listen, of course, to their podcast so you can hear how the conversation generally goes. And then you don't get into the point where you're, sort of freezing up when the conversation starts. And then just very technical things in terms of remembering whatever the back and forth communication is with you. Some people think, I got the interview, and then they forget that, you still have to make sure it's scheduled, make sure you've got the right time zone, make sure you've met all their requirements. If the podcaster comes back with, fill out this form or send me this information, make sure so try not to forget that there is time between the day they said yes and the day of the recording where you might get other requests related to doing the show. So it's very important. And even if you're doing, 10 or 20 episodes in a course of a month or something like that, make sure you create some kind of system so that you're always keeping track of everything and so you don't lose, the people who have said yes and then kind of ruin the relationship before it got started.
Well, that's got to be important if you have one or two coming up, maybe in your mind, you can keep track of those. But if you have, like you said, 10 coming up, then you have to know who you've sent the info to, who you've confirmed with, who you have to follow up with. And that's going to be very important to the host because they're going to, not only does their show depend on it, and they don't have to, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. They don't have to post anything. But, but they start to develop ideas and beliefs about you if your follow through is excellent, as yours was absolutely tremendous, or if it's not. How do they then look at that interview?
Exactly.
All right. I'm a firm believer in yak, and I'll explain yak in a second. So football fans will know what yak is. Yak is yards after catch. And years ago, they always judged wide receivers by how far down the field they were when they caught a ball. Now they often judge wide receivers by how much yardage they get after catching the ball, and which is yak, yards after catch. So I believe much of marketing is yards after catch. What do you do once you've done something? What do you do with that? If you go to you have an exhibit in an exhibit hall and you get names and you make contacts and the like, what do you do with the follow-up? Yes. So here's my question to you. What's the yak? What can people do once they are interviewed? How can they use that to promote themselves?
Yeah, that's, that it's so important. This opportunity to interview on a podcast creates an asset for you. So the podcast host, of course, owns the show, but your opportunity is in promoting it, and they want you to promote it. They expect you to promote it. So you have this link usually where you can put it on all of your social media, all of your newsletters. If you have an email newsletter, on your website, you can use it to go out to other people and say, I have appeared on other shows. Here's what I talk about. You could have, maybe if your clients, your customers who want to know more about you, understand more about what you do, you can send them the link and say, here, I spoke about it on this particular podcast. And, if you don't like social media, like some people don't like posting all the time and so on, it's actually a much easier post to say, listen to me on this show, hear me speak. And you don't have to do it just once. Once is great, obviously, and doing it on all your social media over the course of a week, whatever week the show that premieres is great. But you can come back to it. Let's say you do a related kind of talk, or you release a book, or you have questions that come. Somebody says, I'd like to ask you about this thing. You can say, hey, I spoke about it on this particular podcast, and provide them the link again. So you really want to think about it. This is an asset for you, the host, obviously. Both of you are wanting to grow an audience and get your message out and provide value to more people. So the more places that you can think of distributing promotions about you being on the show and what you said and why people would find it interesting to listen, then you're really going to spread the wealth, the intention of being on the show goes much, much further than just filling an hour of talk time, You
used a word twice in that answer that I've never heard it put that way before, and I love it. It's an asset. And it's an asset that you can use.
My business background.
I never looked at it that way, that it's an asset. And if you think about it, if you get on enough of these consistently, whether that's weekly, once a month, or whatever, it's almost like promoting your own show.
Yes.
But you don't have to go through all the logistics of having a show.
Yeah, that's another thing. Now, you don't have to actually do the editing, the preparation, all of that. You have to be prepared yourself and show up and so on. But all the work on creating the asset, so to speak, is actually done by the podcast host. So what you're doing is promoting, but you're promoting yourself and your message or your product, like whatever, reason that you chose, that you wanted to be on the show in the first place. That's what you're actually doing. So this is so valuable for you. And don't let it go. I think one of the things that happens to guests, and I want to make this point because, hosts cannot always tell you exactly when the show is going to be live. So you go off and you're doing your own other thing and you're busy. And then you get an email one day that says, oh, the show's live right now. And you're thinking, I got to drop everything and do all this promotion. So what I like to do is have a plan around how I want to promote the show. And I'll have that all set up. So when I get that email that says show's live, I don't have to drop everything. I just put into my mind that this week I have to put on, my to-do list that to put this plan, execute on this plan of promoting the show across all my social media. And then I'll put it in my next newsletter and so on. So you want to make sure you have something like that, because I think that some people, a show, it might be 2 months later that it's live after you've done the interview. And so that's something to keep in mind. If you're doing if you're doing a book tour or something like that, you want to start reaching out to podcasters months in advance so that you can get on the calendar for when you want to be. But you don't know for sure when the show will be live in most cases. So just have your plan ready and just know every time you do an interview, you're going to promote that way. And then again, remember what each show is about. Remember what each podcast host's description was like. You might want to keep track of that as well, because that way, if you ever ask a question under any of those particular subject headings, you can point to that particular podcast interview and refer people to it.
I love that idea. That's
great,
awesome.
Great.
All right. So what final suggestions do you have for people who are doing this? And well, actually, even before then, can you give me your thoughts on this? Where you said you don't know when this is going out, might go out next week, might go out 2 months from now when you're a guest on a show. Would you agree that not every interview actually goes out?
Oh, yes, that's true as well. I'm glad you raised that. It's totally the podcaster's decision, and they might have any particular reason not to release a show. There's nothing you could do about it. It's the way things go. You might have thought it was the greatest interview ever. For whatever reason, they decide they don't want that one, to be released, and that would be the end of it. You could say, as I mentioned before, you could ask them. Now, it's hard to say how long you let go by before, you think it's never going to be released, because again, they could have a 3-month-long list of shows they've already posted. But you could ask them and say, did you decide not to use this episode? Could you give me the file? And you could, if they're still willing to let you have it, and maybe you wouldn't be able to promote it as a episode of their show, but maybe they'll let you keep a copy of the interview that you could use for other reasons. I don't know how that would work, but it's just a possibility. But I think, you do. It's not common though, because again, you've spent time, they've spent time. So there's really no reason to hold the show back unless there's something else that happens that they decide not to use it. But I've definitely heard hosts say that they have not, there's interviews they have not posted.
I've had some of those. Well, I shouldn't say some. I've had one. Where the person just didn't come prepared.
Okay.
And to your point about all the prepping, it's necessary.
Yeah, and I don't think, you don't have to worry about like this is, some big extra thing you're doing, because it should be already part of what you're doing. Because whatever it is that you want to talk about should be something you're doing, I assume, or about, or something like that. So it should just be part of your own process around how you create your message, how you promote your message, all of that. And that way, doing interviews just enhances and improves what you're doing already. So think of it that way as well, that this is just part of that process around whatever your bigger picture is.
All right. So that brings us to any other ideas for them as we wrap this up.
Yeah, I just want to say, I know some people might have been thinking as I was going through the approach around, researching and all of that, it sounds like, that sounds like a lot of work. And again, I just want to stress that this is absolutely a DIY process. So you're not, hiring a PR firm to do this for you, but it also means you don't need some fancy schmancy, network or high level influencers to get you, interviews and that kind of thing. This is a process where you can absolutely go out, learn what you need to learn about different podcasts, and talk to podcasters directly, reach out to them, tell them how you have value that's related to what they're talking about. I assume, that the relation between your subject and their podcast means then that they become part of your network, and maybe there's an opportunity in the future to collaborate on something else. You're actually building a bigger world around your subject matter. And so taking the time to do it, putting a couple hours a week, the amount of time you spend on it is totally dependent on how many interviews you want to do. I mean, with so many thousands and thousands of podcasts, if you want to do hundreds of interviews, you could spend a few hours a day and probably get positive responses every day. So that you just decide how much time you want to put into it based on what your goals are. But keep in mind that it's a bigger process than just doing that interview for half hour, what have you. It's more also about building your network, building your audience, making collaborations with people that are talking like you're talking, doing what you're doing, like-minded people. And I think if you look at it that way, it does not seem as tedious and so on. I mean, technically, yes, searching on Google and trying to find the names of podcasts or chasing people down on social media. I should say something about that quickly. I don't use social media a lot to actually find people, but I know that's another way. So my process emphasize looking at the podcast directories and a Google search, but some people also just like to go to social media and see what they can find. And I did not, use social media that way. So anyway, so you can get into this business of doing this think about the opportunity to speak and to be part of the virtual stage of podcasts, to build your authority and enhance your message. And then just you take the time to do it, make it a bigger part of your goals around what you're doing, and then you get the most out of it that way. So I think, don't focus too much on what a drain searching on search engines can be like. Just focus on the bigger goals of what you want to accomplish.
Right, and they don't have to go and try to get 100 in one sitting.
No.
If you just do this, make it a habit, put it into your weekly, bi-weekly, whatever it might be, into your schedule, then it'll continue to ramp up and then get where you want it to go, right?
Yeah. And sometimes, I just test keywords. And so I will go into a directory and I'll put a keyword in and see what's returned. And I'll just start making a list of the podcast names. And that will give me an idea of how deep the search could go. Because some percentage of the shows are no longer active, as I mentioned. Some percentage don't have interviews. And sometimes you can't tell. You have to look at the episodes and you realize, they're all 5-minute how-to episodes. So there's no way that this person does interviews. So I just make a long list. And then, so you might spend a day just kind of weeding out the ones that don't look good. And then the next day, start looking for contact information for the ones that made sense. So just test that with the different keywords.
All right. And while you were talking before and you said you don't really do a lot with the social media to look for this. And I said, I think you contacted me through LinkedIn. And that's not accurate. You contacted me through my contact page on my website.
Yeah, Sonia, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
All right, Case. Well, this is a lot of information, and I hope it inspires people to go out and do it. And if they need help, how can they contact you, and how might you be able to help them?
Yeah, I'd like to offer listeners a checklist that I have. It's a free checklist of the approach that I've been explaining. It's at caselane.net/checklist. And I can give you that link as well. And you can have that and you can reach out that way. And also you can just send me an email, contactcase@readyentrepreneur.com.
I'll put both of those in the web notes. I hope people do contact you because I can see this being very beneficial for them. And I'm thankful you reached out and contacted me so we could bring this information to them. Case, I wish you the best.
Thank you so much. It was great.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.